All right, Chapter 14, Part 2, Coastal Erosion, or Life is Not a Beach. Storm surges are responsible for erosion, among other things, and that's where we're going to focus this next part of the chapter. I showed you these two images right here of the mouth of the Mississippi before Katrina and after. And all this green area is land that washed away. Here's some examples of erosion caused by Hurricane Katrina. This is before, so notice these two houses in yellow, and then look at after. All of that, let's go back. All the roads are washed away, covered in sand. Some of these houses are gone, right? That's erosion. Here's another example. Same houses right here, right? This is before, and this is after. Now look at this. Look at this house right here. It was not right on the beach, but pretty close, but now the water is coming right up to it. So all that beach eroded away. It washed away in the storm. These are barrier islands again. These kind of long, flat, basically sandbars. And most of the east coast of the United States, from Florida all the way up into Massachusetts, are basically covered with these barrier islands. So one of the issues they're having is that hurricanes cause a lot of erosion on these. But there's other problems too. Okay? Along our Gulf Coast, we're seeing erosion rates. Beaches are being lost at the rate of 6 feet a year. It doesn't happen all at once. Sometimes it happens faster in a storm, sometimes not. Some areas are gaining sand, but the general trend along the coast is erosion. And why is that? Well, one of the things is, with global warming, we're seeing rising sea levels, so the water is reaching further inland. But another thing is, because of global warming, we're seeing what we think are increasingly stronger storms with more rain, and that helps. So those things are both being caused by anthropogenic climate change. Now, coastal erosion is sporadic. It happens after storms. Here's some more Hurricane Katrina pictures. These are some of the wetlands I told you about. This was before, and that's after. And you can see the huge loss of land. Right? Here's another one. Before and after. It's also episodic, which means that it happens on a regular basis. So this is the Mississippi Delta. The mouth of the Mississippi River. It goes right through here, and this is where it is currently. Here's New Orleans. Now, the river, over the last couple million years, it comes down. At one point, its delta was here, and then a flood moved it over here, and then it was here, and then it was here. It was here, and now it's here. It just moves variously. But every time it does that, before people lived here, every spring the river would flood, and it would drop all the mud in the water and build these deltas out. And what happens is this. Every year, this area got a fresh, thick coat of mud and built it up so that it wasn't underwater. But the problem is, when the mud dries after the spring fall, what does mud do when it gets dry, right? It kind of contracts and shrinks. So every year it would get built up with mud, but then it would sink a little bit. The reason it never went underwater was every year it got more mud. So it just built up. It would shrink, build, shrink, build, shrink, build. But one of the things that's happened is we've modified the river. We don't like floods. We don't want floods to happen. So instead of allowing the floods every year to basically spread mud all over the delta, we channel it in the river so it doesn't flood and it gets flushed out to sea. One thing that's happened is New Orleans has sank 8 feet in the last 200 years. Most of the city of New Orleans is actually now below sea level and has to have big, huge levees around it so it doesn't flood. And this ties into this human modification of beaches. So why is erosion happening? We've done things to change the environment, not just climate-wise. A big part of it is sand. The sand that builds the beaches has to come from somewhere, and human development has trapped it. So if you build a dam on a river, as we've talked about, that traps sediment in the water. You can't get to the ocean. If you build houses on the beach, you don't want your beach to erode. You take steps to keep your beach there. So you stop sediment from being moved around. If we do flood control, on the Mississippi River, we now have these series of levees on either side of the river to keep the water in the river when it floods. But the problem is, all that stuff in the river that used to flood the land and drop the mud every spring is now in that river. It gets pushed all the way out to the sea where it's too deep to fill up. All of these basically come down to one thing. If there's not enough sand or sediment being dumped into the water, Erosion will eventually move the sand that is still there away, and there's nothing to replace it. So what's happening is beaches on the East Coast are being, in a sense, starved of sand. Okay? That's a problem because not only do we use the beaches for our own enjoyment, but as we've talked about, these coastal environments are often very, very valuable for wildlife, for animals and for fishes and for birds. So it supports the ecosystem and it also supports the economy. If you're a shrimp fisherman, you need these shallow waters for shrimp. Here's a picture. Here we have a stream coming down, and every year it brings in some dirt and some sediment into the water. And the current blows it this way, so it builds these beaches. But now a dam has been built. So now there's no more sand coming out. There's less sand. And what happens is, instead of these beaches being built, the current carries the sand away. And the beach actually shrinks. So how do we stop that? This is not a joke. One thing we build are groins. So laugh it out, get it out of your system. A groin, I'm going to show you a picture, is a concrete pier that sticks straight out in the water to kind of catch that sand. I'm going to show you some pictures. Another version is called a jetty, I'll show you that, or a seawall. So here's some examples. This is the general pattern, this blue arrow, of longshore current. So the sand is being moved this way, basically. These are groins, big, huge piers that stick out in the water. And what happens is they catch the sand on this side so it builds back up, as opposed to being eroded away. Jetties are built whenever a river enters a lake or a harbor. This stops it from being covered up in sand. So we actually have these. Navy Pier is one of these by the Chicago River. You can see the sand's being built up here on this side. So these are another picture. These groins right here are built out from the beach. You can see that they're kind of catching the sand on this side, like this. But probably here's one you're more familiar with. North Avenue Beach in Chicago. Here's Lakeshore Drive. You can see they go out into the water like this. So all the sand that's coming down Lake Michigan, it catches it on one side, on this side. Of course, now they're underwater, right? The lake has risen so much these are underwater. When the water recedes, most of this beach is going to be gone. The erosion will take that sand away, and the process will start all over again. We have many of these in Chicago, seawalls. Here's another example. You build this big, thick wall right here in the beach so that the waves don't wear it away. The only problem is, what happens is, now there's nothing to stop the sand here coming back down to the beach. So there's nothing to refill the sand, and all this just wears away. And the beach may have been out here 10 years ago, and now it's here. So those are some structures that we can do. What are some other ways? We can use zoning. Zoning is laws that allow you what to build, where to build. So we can decide what types of buildings, if at all, we build near water, how big they are, how dense they are, how close they can be. Here's some examples. Up to about 50 years ago, very few people lived on the beach because of the idea that you could have erosion there and forth. If you had a house near the beach, they were usually very small, very, very easy to build, very inexpensive, and not many of them. If a storm happened and they got washed away, you could build over. Not a big deal. But in the last 50 years, we've seen developments like this, or this, or these huge developments. And that is, if you think about it, right, a lot of money invested, not only in the building, but the tourism. And so for this town, this is Daytona Beach. I mean, think about Daytona Beach without spring break. That's a big hit to their economy. So much so that Florida did not start their stay-at-home order until after spring break because of the money that they would have lost. But these can have serious issues with beach erosion. So we have some questions. The sea is going to do what it's going to do. Should we back off? Should we allow nature to take care of it? I mean, it's very hard to hold back the sea. Or should we use our technology to stop the erosion? But no matter what happens, right? Either one of these choices, there are costs associated with it. In other words, who pays for this? So what are some things that have been doing? One way is to kind of allow nature to take its course and use laws to stop beachfront building. This is Hilo in Hawaii. It's the largest city on the Big Island. In the 1940s, this whole area was built up with buildings, very densely populated. There was a big, huge tsunami and flooding right through this river because it's the lowest land, and a lot of people lost their lives. The worst loss of life in the United States due to a tsunami in 1947. After the wreckage was cleared, the city decided they used zoning laws, and they made all of this area a park. You cannot build here. Now the nice thing about that is if another flood happens, this area is going to flood, and it floods the park. That's not great, but at least you're not flooding people's houses. So you can kind of work with it. The other aspect, private owners. You can have private owners take care of it. They have to pay for it. Or the state and the government do. This is Rogers Park in Chicago. As the lake has got higher, Lake Michigan is the highest it's been in the last so many years. The waves in the winter now, during the last couple of storms, started eroding the beach walls and support and breaking them down. And there was danger of this whole beach wall collapsing, part of this building. So the city stepped in and just dumped a bunch of boulders to stop it. So the city or the government can pay for it. The last option is to not let the city do it, but basically make the property owners liable. If you want to build on a beach, then you have to be ready to pay for the consequences. Some places you have to have insurance. If you live in an area that floods, you have to pay for insurance. Or they make building codes. This building was built to withstand storm surges. So with private ownership being the option and building that, this house was built, laws stated that if you built on the beach, you had to build a certain type of house. So the bottom here is just a garage. There's no living quarters. It's built on stilts that are very strong concrete pillars. So if there's a storm surge, the flood can actually flow through, and it kind of rides it out. These houses were built like regular houses, got all washed away. The last option is government action, laws. So in Rogers Park, as we mentioned, the government helped pay for that. They helped fix the seawall. But the other option would be to say the government is not going to help you pay for that. So if there's no federal money coming to fix that, then people might not build there. Or a couple laws they have here restricting the building in wetlands or requiring people, if they build in areas that are wetlands or areas that would help absorb a flood, they have to account for that and build it into that. There are laws in Illinois that if you build in an area that is a wetland, which is valuable for helping floodwaters. I'm sorry for all the pausing here. We're almost close to lunch and someone's getting a little fussy. And that's not my son, that's actually me. One of the options you can do is require, and they do this in Illinois, that if you develop or build in an area that was a wetland, you have to basically make up that space somewhere else so that you don't actually lose any wetland. And this would still work with flooding. So there we go. We made it through. Let me get ready here. Thank you very much. Don't forget to do your Kahoot, and I will see you virtually soon.